All right. Good morning again. We're starting this over because I had a minor plumbing issue about 5 minutes into the study, and I had water coming down behind me. All right. But that is now over. Now we're going to move on to Revelation chapter 12. Okay, I'm going to repeat some of the things I said because I'm not going to keep both versions of the study. All right. In chapter 12, somewhat parenthetical because it goes back to events. Christ, it goes to Christ, but it's more of like a parable. Not exactly a parable, but it's like it's a symbolic story. It's sort of the story it's the story of the end of the world from a symbolic perspective, I suppose you could say, or of this aspect of the world. And it goes back not just to Christ, but to time immemorial, to the Garden of Eden, even. It does go back to the Garden of Eden, essentially, to the dawn of man. And let's look at it, okay? And there appeared a great wonder in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun, and the moon under her feet, and upon her head a crown of 12 stars. First time I read that made me chuckle a bit, because back in 2017, there was this big wonder in heaven prophecy event where the constellation Virgo from astrology was going to be coming with the rising sun, and the moon was going to be down underneath where the feet were, and there were going to be some stars around her head, or some planets actually. Certainly not 12 planets. There are always stars in that region, so I don't know where they got the 12 stars. I forgot. It's been a while. I did a study on it on my other channel. My other channel being user Paul Strangini. It's linked in the description below, and you can find it very easily there among the videos. And then it was called The False Sign of September 23rd, 2017 or something like that. And while you're at it, you can subscribe, click on the like button, etc., etc. Now we don't have to do that again. If you have a question about any such thing, if you hear of another prophecy scare you might think I'm interested in, you can send your question to that address or leave a comment in the comment section. Though actually, if you have that would be good for something to do with a specific study. If you had a question having nothing to do with the study, it'd be good to send me an email. Though I'll get it either way. All right. So that, September 23rd, 2017. Oh, it was going to be something. I was happy to get a video ahead of the event to say nothing will happen, because it was not a sign. For one, you know why it wasn't a sign? It wasn't a great wonder in heaven to have the constellation Virgo clothed with the sun. Because when you clothe constellations with the sun, they're invisible. They don't appear. It was just the most inane thing. It's like no one saw it. Literally. You'd have to be an astrologer to know it even happened. That's not how the signs of God work. Not like this. And this isn't about the movement of the planets and constellations and all that garbage. They're for signs and seasons. It's like, yeah, but the signs and seasons, they signify things, but that doesn't mean they are for prophetic signals and such. You know what the constellations are good for? Now's the time to plant. We should harvest now. The stars are in alignment because it's that time of year. Because they go through a cycle. As the earth moves around the sun, the constellations move through their courses. All right. So there appeared a great one, and astrology in the Bible is not something in the Bible. People, they've taught. I read a book called The Bible and the Stars, and it was interesting. And some people think it's evil, and some people think it's a real thing. And I find it interesting, but I see no utility. And what am I supposed to do with it? Look at this. This represents the coming Savior, and this represents the Virgin, and this represents the serpent, and this all represents. It's like And you can, the thing about symbols like that, they can be woven into a story. But this is not just a bunch of symbols woven into a story. It is a symbolic story which is constructed, unlike the stars where you have to have an interpreter. And it's really, you know, you shouldn't seek to astrologers and such. And astrology is not a legitimate prophetic, you know, calculator, as far as I'm concerned. I don't find anything in the Bible to say that you should use astrology to figure prophecy out. All right, let's move past that. Let's just finish reading about the woman. Let's read verse 2. And she, being with child, cried, travailing in birth and pain to be delivered. Okay, then it goes to the next wonder. So the first wonder is this woman who's symbolic of, some people, well, Catholics actually identify this as Mary, because Mary was the mother of Jesus, you know, and then they say mother of God, and you know, the funny thing is, like, well, God is without father or mother, as according to Hebrews. So you can only say that in a very particular way, you know, and the urge to say that is the urge to exalt Mary above her station, as far as I'm concerned. But there appeared another wonder in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun and the moon under her feet, and upon her head a crown of 12 stars. See, it goes back to Genesis, when God spoke to the woman in Genesis 3:15, around there, when after the garden, when they ate the fruit, and God pronounces his judgment, he says to the woman, I will greatly multiply thy seed and thy sorrow, or thy seed and thy travail and labor. Let's get the exact wording. You know, basically, in sorrow shalt thou bring forth children, and your husband will rule over you. Your desire shall be to your husband, and he shall rule over you. And actually, it's what he says to the serpent that interests me most. Well, you see, like there, at the beginning, what is pronounced against the woman is that she would have pain in childbirth, and that her husband would rule over her. But yeah, I wanted 15. The reason I said 15, because it's to the serpent. And I will put enmity between thee and the woman, between thy seed and her seed. It shall bruise thy head, and thou shalt bruise his heel. That is taken prophetically to refer to Christ, that he would be the seed of the woman, who would crush the head of the serpent, but he was wounded in the heel of through the crucifixion. And in the sense of this is that, you know, a heel wound is not insignificant, but the idea is that it is not a deadly wound, unless you're Achilles, but it is a wound of, you know, a temporary wound, a wound that you can get over, a wound that is, you know, meant to be at the extremity. It's not like a wound to the core part of the body. So, you know, he could get over the wounds of Satan, the crucifixion. He rose from the dead. But Satan will be utterly crushed. His head will be crushed. And that is that symbolic meaning. That verse is going to be important in this chapter, because the woman, I'm struggling with it somewhat, because what I would say is this symbolic woman represents Eve, Mary, but all the church, Israel. All these things are symbolized by women throughout the Bible. Well, Eve, I mean, you could say people, you know, Eve is not just the first woman. she symbolizes the whole female, all of the femaledom. I don't know, all the feminine world, so to speak, because of the things that are said to her. They apply to all women, like the pain in childbirth, and also that the female, the female was taken on a male, and then there was the two. We have male and female. And to the man, he says, you're gonna in the dust of your. Why don't I just go? You're gonna work your tail off. You're gonna be. That'd be an easier way to just paraphrase it. You're gonna work really hard to bring forth fruit out of the ground. It's gonna be very difficult for you. It's gonna bring forth thorns and thistles. All the days of your life until you die, you're gonna have to work. Until, because prior to that, they were in the Garden of Eden. They were innocent. They were kind of not even really, they weren't self-aware. They were almost animal. I mean, that there was some stage at which man had not attained this, what makes us different from the beasts. And when we obtained it is when we truly become what we are now. And so that they are the progenitors of that. They became human in the way we are human. Whereas prior to that, they were fundamentally different from us. And that's what Genesis is saying, that they were different, they were innocent, they had no consciousness of their nakedness. But when they ate the fruit of the garden, the man, the judgment that was pronounced upon him was that he would eat his bread in the sweat of his brow, meaning, from labor. He would have to work. He wasn't going to be in a garden just picking fruit to live his life. It was going to be work now from now on. And the woman, she was going to have, her desire would be towards her husband. And people, may not understand, like, just how necessary throughout history cooperation between the man and the woman has been. Because a woman with a child is extremely vulnerable. It is only in the modern day where women can get away with being single because either they have high income potential on their own, or the state plays the role of the father. And so if a woman has, if a woman has a child and there's no father, she has access to a very significant number of benefits from health, food, and even housing, and even cash assistance. All those things are available. So she don't, I'm an independent woman that don't need no man except all the taxes collected from men who work. And that's what we have. So it's a bit of a myth. There are very few women, as a percentage of all women who are single mothers, who are able to support themselves without help from men. And because the majority of taxes are paid by men. So I mean, that has been throughout history that men and women have cooperated, and that they need a man's help, and men will submit to that, as far as submit to taking care of them and providing for them and working to support the family. Okay. Let's go into the symbolic things. But what I'm saying is, like, Mary brought forth Jesus, right? But the idea that the woman had a seed was spoken to Eve, that she would have a seed. And there would be enmity between the seed of the woman, because she's pregnant here, and that's the idea. She's being with child. And like in Genesis, she needs to, you're going to have a seed that's going to have this war with the serpent. And that's what this is about. The next wonder is the great dragon called the serpent. He's there. This is the continuation of that story from Genesis. You can throw Mary in, because Mary literally gave birth to Jesus. But Mary is the descendant of Eve, as all women are. And because it's not, I know some people are very sensitive about Mary, but it's like, it's not about an individual, and oh gosh, people are going to be upset. But it's like, It is about the collective, the humanity, out of the female aspect of humanity, eventually came forth Christ. And the 12 stars symbolize the 12 tribes of Israel. And that was Mary. She was a Jew, and Jesus came forth out of her. Clothed with the sun and the moon under her feet. The symbology of that. Well, it's sort of saying, she has dominion over... The moon is usually... Like all the timelines of Satan in chapter 9 when it talks about the locust army. Actually, not that part. Well, they have 5 months, sure. And then you go to chapter 11. And when the Gentiles tread the holy city under their feet, it's for 42 months. Months are the division of the days of the year into initially moons. Now, our months aren't exactly the length of a moon. But if, like in the Hebrew calendar, there was actually more months in the year because the moon, the cycles of the moon are not as long as a month. So it goes around and it's not consistent with the solar year. And if you get into calendars, you'll figure that out. I'm not into calendars. I'm not a big calendar guy. Because I think the sun and the moon and the stars, as far as like trying to look for like that as a timing thing. So people always, when it comes to prophecy, what are they trying to do? They're always trying to predict some time, like it's about to happen. I'm not into that at all. So the symbology of having the moon under her feet, she has sort of this demeanor where the serpent was going to be put under the feet of the woman. And sort of like the thing that measures his time is under her feet. It's like time is going by, and it sort of symbolizes her ultimate victory over the things of Satan. And since it's a measure of time, it's sort of saying that in time she will have victory over the serpent, and then or through her seed actually she will have victory over the serpent. And she's clothed with the sun. The sun, when the two witnesses have power to prophesy a certain number of days. And when the measure of the things of the righteous or of God, in Revelation at least, are measured in days, which is a solar measure, obviously. Or 3.5 years is also a solar measure because the Earth going around the sun is a solar measure, And so it's like the protection, she is clothed with the sun, in that the sun, the light of God, that sort of thing, is shielding and enveloping her. That is her garments. Her garments are the garments of the sun and of light, clothed in righteousness and light. So, this is all just so that we say the woman's good. That this is a symbol of, this is the heroic symbol. She is bearing a child. That's the, that is, the most important thing a woman can do is bear children. And in our society, we've sort of degraded that, and we've forgotten that, and we've tried to say that the most important thing a woman can do is be a man and go get a job and earn her living in the sweat of her brow. And a lot of women take that path and they get to be 30, 35, whatever. And then they suddenly realize that that's not really what they want. Not all, okay? Not all. But on your average, most women not just want it, but this is, aside from anyone's desire, it is the most important thing you can do, raise the next generation. And not just cast them off to daycare, but actually to raise them or be part of their lives, even if you're working. It's not a slam against working moms. But at least bearing the children is a major important role, period. So she wants to have, she's bringing forth the child, wants to be delivered, right? So that we see the woman, she's clothed in the sun, the moon is under her feet. but she's in great pain and travail. And there appeared another wonder in heaven. Behold, behold a great red dragon, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and 7 crowns upon his heads. And his tail drew the third part of the stars of heaven, and did cast them to the earth. And the dragon stood before the woman, which was ready to be delivered, for to devour her child as soon as it was born. And she brought forth a man-child who was to rule all nations with a rod of iron. And her child was caught up unto God and to his throne. It's just so thick. All right. I also mentioned, well, I'm just going to assert this. The woman also symbolizes the church, because that comes to pass, or in part. You know, the ultimately it is Eve, it is Mary, it is Israel, it is the bride of Christ. All those things have been symbolized by a woman. And when you extract all those things, I remember, actually, I tried, someone argued with me once, and they said that Mary was the ultimate woman. Like, the way Jesus is the ultimate man. You know, you extract from man all the virtues. I mean, you think of all the virtues that man could possess, and we look at Christ and say, that is where they all dwell. He is the ultimate man. You know, he lays his life down to save the world. And that's what we believe. But the ultimate woman, you know, I guess I always think is purely symbolic, because it is the bride of Christ, the tribes of Israel. You know, I mean, it is not just a woman, but all mankind, because God treats us as his woman. Through Christ, he takes us all to wife, so to speak, in the sense of he saves us, he protects us, he provides for us. He becomes our, you know, in that sense, like a husband. And that's how it is symbolized throughout the Gospels. Jesus makes references to weddings, a wedding feast. You know, a man made a marriage for his son, and he invited all the people to come, to the guests, you know, to be guests, and they wouldn't come. But it's the analogy of the wedding. He prepared a wedding. The 10 virgins, there's a wedding, and the bridegroom comes. When they criticized Christ for eating and drinking and not fasting like John and his disciples, he said, can the children of the bride chamber fast while the bridegroom is with them? He portrays himself as the bridegroom. And the bride he takes is not just some single woman, his mother, but it is, like he said, who is my mother? Who are my brethren? And he said, he pointed to his disciples, these are my mother and my brother and my sister. And when it comes to his wife, it is not the individual Mary. It is all the believers. It is the church. She is the woman in the end. Over time, the woman is the symbol. You know, Eve is the woman at the beginning, and Israel, and then in a moment of time, Mary became the woman who actually brought forth the man-child, because there's only one who's going to bring it forth. But in a sense, all Israel brought it forth, in that he came to save the lost sheep of the tribe of Israel. And now the dragon appears, a great red dragon. He's red here. Most of the time they don't mention his redness. The great red dragon. Red, it goes back, it makes me think, well, why is he red? Well, I think of the red horse. It's a symbol of something that is warlike. The red horse goes forth to cause people to kill one another. So it's the color of blood, and here it symbolizes his murderous intent. Having 7 heads and 10 horns. That's going to become more important in chapter 13, where the beast. See, here's an interesting thing. The beast, like I said, the beast is somehow. They worship the beast and they worship the dragon. It's like both. And the beast that comes up out of the earth or out of the sea, sorry, in chapter 13, has 7 heads and 10 horns. But there, one of the things that I always found interesting is that it has 10 crowns on its head, on its horns, I believe. And here it has 7 crowns on its heads. So this discrepancy, I don't think it's accidental, but why it's, the crowns are on his heads. He has 7 heads, the dragon, and 10 horns. So I guess because it's red and because it has these horns and multiple heads, obviously it's a symbol of Satan. But it's not obviously an individual in that sense, because later on it talks about the horns being, the 7 heads are 7 mountains, the 10 horns are 10 kings. But here the crowns are on the heads, not on the horns. And I'm not sure, maybe later on something will come to me as to why the crowns here are on the heads and there are only 7 of them. Because maybe this represents Satan at a different time than in the end times, like his always time. I don't know. I don't even think the events here are necessarily chronological. Now, when we talk about the tail drawing the third part of the stars of heaven, that is often thought to mean that, to refer to the fall of Satan in some previous time where he draws a third of God's angels after him. We talked about the symbology of tails, right? For one, what about the 7 heads? Like we have 1 head, Christ. Why does the dragon have 7 heads? You know what I mean? And even like, if you think of a hierarchy in terms of, we have the people and then there's the apostles, and, as you go up like the ladder of like Christian gifts and stuff, at the bottom you have a lot of people with minor gifts, and then, there's teachers, and then prophets, and then apostles, and then the Lord Christ himself sits atop all this. We have 1 head, even Christ. Even the Catholic Church, they have a hierarchy where there are many priests at the bottom, then bishops and cardinals, and up to the Pope. But what does it mean when you have a single body, and out of it you have 7 heads and 10 horns? And it's like the multiple leaders. Even the idea of a creature with multiple heads looks like an upside down pyramid, as far as you have, instead of you having many at the bottom, you have many at the top. So there's something very upside down about his rule. I don't think it means that he puts the people on top, like democracy. I don't think so, because even in a democracy, we still select a leader to still lead from the top down. Though we invest power with the people, that power, the power of any individual within that collective is small. And even the collective of all the people in a democracy itself, a non-direct democracy, really, we're talking about a republic here, where we democratically elect our leaders, it's not the same. And plus there are 10 at the top. But I guess I look at that as, I've often thought about it this, is that when Satan reigns as Antichrist, it's really tough to tell everyone, because he's not going to be like the Lord Jesus in a lot of ways. He's not going to have the same level of power. But he's going to have to convince the whole world to follow after him, because that's what he wants to do. It's not like, he's going to do anything else. I've often thought, why would he do what God wants him to do? And it's like, well, why do I do what God wants me to do? It's because I want to do this, whatever I'm doing. I want to do it. I do it voluntarily because it's what's in my heart to do. And Satan's just like that. It's like, he just wants to do it. It's like, I want to break things, it's his nature. He's utterly predictable. He isn't going to do any different than the prophecies say, because he just really wants to do what it says. It's like the Lord has said, if I let him loose, this is what he's going to do. And Satan isn't of any other opinion on the matter. It's exactly what he wants to do. Given the chance, it's what he'll do. So what he does... Oh, and the 10 horns, it's very difficult to sort of give one story to everyone on the earth, it's going to be hard to tell the same thing to the Christians, the same thing to the Muslims, the same thing to the Buddhists. And though we have a great communication system, the internet and all that stuff, it's not so great. It just, in the sense of this, it's great, but it's not hard to just take it out. We could just eliminate all the communication through the internet and all that stuff. Just take it all away. Everyone goes dark. That's something Satan could easily do, so that you couldn't communicate with other people. At least not on the other side of the world. He could break all that down, so all of a sudden there was no communication. Then, in each part of the world where he could say what is most convenient to convince them. I don't know why I'm having trouble with that word. To convince them to follow him. And so they each could be having sort of a different version of Satan. He's one thing. But over here in America, he's Jesus. Over in the Middle East, he's Allah. Or, I don't know. It'd be interesting because the Jews are so close to all that. What's he going to do there? But as you can see, it would not be hard to imagine him using sort of different personas in different areas of the world in order to rule them. And so you have 7 heads and 10 horns. It means that, if the 7 heads are 7 mountains on which the woman sitteth, some people say, oh, that's Rome. Well, Rome was built on 7 hills. But I think the 7 mountains represents all the nations of the world, because 7 is the completeness of all. Like we have 7 continents or whatever, but you could think of the world as being 7 mountains in that sense. If you're going to think of the mountains symbolically. Of course, I'm getting ahead of myself in the 7 mountains, but I don't want to be like, well, we'll wait to hear what it says later. We kind of got to talk about this right now. If you have any familiarity with Revelation, you'll know later on that it says in chapter 17 of the beast that she rides, the woman, the great whore, that his 7 heads are 7 mountains. So that's what I think that's all about, is that he takes on different personas to deceive the world, because he's not going to have the power of Christ. He'll have certainly enough power to knock out our internet. That's no problem. We could do that. He can't do things like Jesus, like transform all the Christians and take them up and then ride down in a massive army and speak people, and just cause mountains to go, just terraform or whatever. He doesn't have these sweeping powers like the Lord will have. So his power, he has power to perform miracles and stuff, but it's somewhat limited. The tail, prophetically, the head is the ancient and honorable. When we talk about the respective persons, the concept of respecting persons, it is basically, the head is, like your head represents how you present yourself to the world. It is your face. Often, and when people put special hats on their heads to show their station or whatever, or like a king wears a crown, a policeman wears a particular kind of cap, firemen have hats, and so also that a man's garment, his face, his dress, his appearance, he's wearing a suit, it all says something about that person and their station, or it is some sort of declaration. And the head is the ancient and honorable, because the head is where where your age is going to show. Like you look upon a man, you see, well, he's old, he's got time, or You know, you may see their face and see it's clean, and his hair is well kept, and you say he looks like someone who is, especially in ancient times, you know, if he's all dirty and his hair's all matted, he might be a homeless person, right? So it is a good indicator of someone's station, and that's where heads kind of come in. Like I'm thinking of that prophecy I quoted where it says, "The head is ancient and honorable, and the tail is the prophet that teacheth lies." The thing that comes around, around sideways and sneaking, and the tail. And so the idea that the tail drawing the third part of the stars of heaven does somewhat speak of deceit and false prophecy and things like that. And they cast them to the earth. I've never been... See, here's the thing. The whole story of Satan's rebellion, quote unquote, there really is no story of Satan's rebellion as far as I can tell. I say, well, what about this? It's like, this doesn't sound like a rebellion per se. He draws a third part of the stars of heaven. If that is angels, like symbolically, the stars are symbolizing angels and stuff. I would hesitate to call it necessarily angels, but it is of the heavenly luminaries or whatever, you know what I mean? Of the, the idea that he is deceiving angels. Well, if they were deceived, they were created with that potential. Just like Satan. His fall was not something he engineered, but rather something that was built into him. And I can't see any other option, because a perfect angel doesn't fall. You know what I mean? He is Satan, and he was created to be Satan, and that's what I believe. And that, and then not that there is a, he does, like people talk about Ezekiel chapter 28, and I sing that song. I didn't used to sing it, but I haven't sung it in a while. But it talks about, you were perfect in your ways till iniquity was found in you. Perfect in your ways is not perfect in every way. You know what I'm saying? Iniquity being in you, being discovered in you, implies that you are not perfect. There is iniquity in you. It didn't say, till you invented iniquity. You know what I mean? It was in there. It was deep in his heart. There was iniquity. And it's not, and as I've said it many times, it's not that God takes these innocent, beautiful creatures and makes them evil. He could make the same thing with no flaws, but it would be a different person. You know what I mean? Like, because the version of me that, if you take just genetic me, right, and you just tweak things perfectly so that I'm not sinful, so that I have no tendencies towards sin, it'll be, to you it'll seem like me, but it won't be the same conscious person, because my consciousness is has sin in it, and it's not as easy. It's just like with twins. It's like twins don't share one consciousness. They're not the same conscious being just because they're the same outwardly, and inside their bodies they're all identical as far as DNA and all that. So no. So I don't think this is a primordial rebellion of Satan. The woman is travailing to bring forth a man-child. I don't think of this as a chronology. She is travailing to bring forth the child that was promised that would crush the serpent's head. And ultimately it was not fulfilled in Christ's incarnation. That he being born into the earth and being crucified and caught up to God, it didn't fulfill everything. Just as it says, You know, it says all things are put under his feet, yet we don't see all things put under his feet. We don't see the dragon put under his feet. In fact, the dragon is going to be cast out. It said her child was caught up into God, into his throne, in that section we had read already. We'll hang on to the thought about the stars of heaven a little bit. But so he stands before the woman which was ready to be delivered and to devour her child as soon as it was born. She brought forth a man-child who was to rule all nations with a rod of iron, and her child was caught up to God and to his throne. I want to almost suggest that this is not referring to the same thing as the travail she's suffering right there. She's suffering to bring forth a different man-child. I mean, other than she brought forth Christ, but she needs Christ the suffering, Christ the servant, Christ who was crucified and rose from the dead and was caught up to God into his throne. But she still needs to bring forth Christ the King, Christ the Conqueror, Christ the God, God from heaven, and every knee shall bow, every tongue shall confess. She hasn't brought him forth yet. So this is not a chronology, like she's sitting there, and then all of a sudden there's a child and he's caught up away. She wants to bring forth a child, and the dragon wants to devour it. The dragon's trying to stop what the woman is trying to bring forth. She flees into the wilderness, where she hath a place prepared of God, that they should feed her there 1,260 days. There we see the days. See, a lot of people, for prophecy's sake, have put in this. Now, and whether or not you want to think of that as two man-childs is not important. That's just a thought I'm having as I'm reading this. It's very much simpler to just say, like, well, Paul, it's all one child. Fine, maybe that's the case. Maybe that's the case. I've always regarded it as that. But I do see that there is more to be brought forth. You know what I'm saying? It's the same child. Like later on, it refers to the rest of her seed, the remnant of her seed. I'm trying. Okay, we got plenty of time. Good. The clock is different from the time in the study because the study started late. Okay. It's a complicated story. It's hard to bring everything out of it. At least for me. And she brought forth a man-child who was to rule all nations with a rod of iron. That's, the rod of iron and all that, the rigorous rule, that goes back to earlier in the book, right? Where it says, where we're talking about they that overcometh, I will grant to sit with me in my throne, even as I also overcame and sat down with my Father in his throne. Or he that overcometh, well, and he shall rule them with a rod of iron, as the vessels of a potter shall they be broken in shivers, even as I received of my Father, and I will give him the morning star. Right? I think, is that where he offers him the crown? He that overcometh? It's one of the early ones, whatever. But anyways, he shall rule them with a rod of iron. It's something that's said of Christ, and also of his... they that overcometh, that they shall reign with him in that iron rule. And and he was caught up into heaven and to God. Okay, we covered that. Sorry. I don't think there's any, the thing is, it's like, if I was talking about salvation or a subject that I just find easy to articulate, it would be a little... This is not easy to articulate. Okay, the tail drew the third part says, cast him in the earth. All right, Satan. Now that see, I look at that as kind of like a reference to chapter 9, where he comes, the beast that ascendeth out of the bottomless pit. He has the key of the bottomless pit. He opens it, and the locusts come out. And I think of the locusts as Satan's sort of angelic host. I'll call it angelic. I guess because I think of an angel as a messenger of God. A fallen angel, it really is like no, it is not, I don't believe the idea of a fallen angel that's specific. It talks about like the angels that sinned in Jude, well, in 2 Peter. God spared not the angels that sinned, but cast them down to hell. Tartarus is the Greek there, which was in the Greek legends the prison of the giants, which I think answers nicely to the idea of the bottomless pit. And so there is this, so there is the notion that the angels did sin, that there was a sin. I just don't like the idea of a rebellion, like they trying to overthrow God. I don't think that ever happened. It was like whatever war Satan conducts, I don't think it has anything to do with trying to overthrow God himself, because it doesn't make any sense. God himself, like if you get rid of God, you get rid of reality. Like there is no, it's not possible to get rid of God. Like it just doesn't, you know what I mean? So whatever he's waging war over, it's something else. To get, he is now restrained. It says in 2 Thessalonians, he is being held back from doing what he wants to do, right? Satan wants to carry out his will. In 2 Thessalonians, it says he is restrained until he is not restrained any longer. And that has a lot to do, I think, with what we're reading here. Satan would like to do things in the earth. And the angels that he drew with him, because Satan was more present in the earth at some times than others, under certain constraints. Because he only gets to do whatever he wants to do based on authority given him. Like he was on the earth to tempt Christ. He was, and you could say, is he here now? Well, in a spiritual way, but not in a present way. So he has angels that are willing to do with him what he does. And he wants to do that. And to me, the war is just he wants to get out, break out, and do what he wants to do. It's not about him trying to overthrow God and become... He wants to be seen as God. He wants to sit in the mercy seat. He wants to... But the idea of him actually... he covets like the position that Christ occupies. But the idea of like... I don't know. There's a bit of... And maybe he has a strain of insanity. And maybe, I guess it just makes no sense to me. Like, the idea of overthrowing God himself. As if the world could endure without God. He says things to himself, like in the person of the king of Babylon. Chapter 14. As I said, I want people to understand. It's like I'm not ignorant of the fact that it says, I will ascend into heaven. I will exalt my throne above the stars of God. I will sit also upon the mount of the congregation in the sides of the north. I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. I will be like the Most High. He wants to be like God. He wants to be worshipped as God. And certainly to wound the Son of God, he would take any opportunity to wound God. I mean, they're not saying that against that. He hates God, just like a lot of people do. But the idea of, and some people would love to see God dead in all reality, just blown away, I guess, I guess. But I think Satan would know that's not really possible. So he contents himself with chaos and with putting himself in the position of being God and leading people astray. And just for his own pleasure or whatever his motivation is. It's not always clear what motivates him, except his own desire to occupy the pinnacle to be at the top of everything and have everyone up, looking up, and more. Because you go, why do people want to become celebrities? Why do people want to become president or king or whatever? It's because, the adoration you feel from all the people looking to you and exalting you above everyone else. It's quite a rush. I mean, I've performed on stage, and back before I was serious about my belief, I was in a rock band and like performed on stage, and when you hear especially the ladies screaming and stuff, it's very, it feels kind of there's a feeling of exhilaration that goes along with that, of being people, people are cheering for you and all that, and it's like very intoxicating. I'm sure, and that was just a small thing. It wasn't like, it was like a couple hundred people, not like you see tens of thousands of people cheering for someone. It's quite a intoxicant. Very few people who endure that really are able to maintain the same, the right perspective and humility. And Satan himself is devoured with the desire to be adored like that. And that's what he craves. So he sits there to devour her child. And she brought forth the child, and the child was caught up into God. So Satan's attempt at the Lord Jesus failed, if you want to look at it that way. Throw yourself off the temple. And the woman fled into the wilderness, where she hath a place, where she is fed there 1,260 days. That's about 3.5 years. About. And there's a little difference between months and years, and time periods, but they're about the same. And they are. And what is the number? Like, what is that? 3.5 years. Daniel had 70 weeks. Right? And the 70th week was like the critical one, symbolically and prophetically. I always thought that, it was interesting to me that in the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, and Luke, there's really no indication of the passage of time. And I had a friend who insisted, he was a pastor, and he insisted that the ministry of Christ could only have been 1 year long. And I did research on that, as far as I just went to the Bible to see if there was any. I was like, I've never, and I read through the Gospels. I'm like, right? But then I got to John, and I wrote a paper called Time in the Gospel of John because of this. And I found that that there were these indications of feasts in the progression of time. And I couldn't identify all the feasts, but but it was definitely not 1 year. It was in John, according to John, we're looking at like 3 years, perhaps. More than 2. And when you're talking about the absence of information, you could say 5 years, maybe. But I wouldn't say that. I'm just saying, because if we're talking about a period of time in which we're not taking down all the past, we're not really marking time very well, because that's not the point. When the Gospel of John talks about different feasts coming around multiple times, that's where we get the idea that Jesus had a 3-year ministry. Or maybe 3.5 years is the way I look at it. Because Messiah, the 70th week had something to do with the coming of Messiah. There were 70 weeks, and in the 70th week, and in the midst of the week, in the middle of the final week, the Messiah should be cut off, but not for himself. And the people of the prince that shall come shall destroy the holy city. Right? And that's in Daniel. So I thought, that fits nicely with Jesus being killed and crucified and raised from the dead and leaving, and then Jerusalem being destroyed by the Romans later. Because when Jesus leaves, it's like that prophetic week never got finished. And so now we're waiting for that time to come again so that the final week can be completed. It's also an interesting thing that I find this very fascinating. Because I don't believe like Genesis is a chronology of the earth. Like it's not, I don't measure the age of the earth based on the generations of Genesis. But as a book, the Bible is fascinating in that if Christ was born in 4 BC, he was born exactly 4,000 years after the chronology says Adam and Eve were made. And that seems to me like just absolutely amazing. Like it just happens to land on that, on the year 4000. You know, I mean, it's such a coincidence. And the thing is, we're talking, you're piecing out genealogies from Genesis and from the Kings and all that stuff. I don't even know how they completed. I've always been skeptical of it because I've never seen an unbroken genealogy in the Bible. There is no unbroken down to the time of Christ, like where it tells you the exact number of years. At some point, they start picking up on, they date it according to, well, the Babylonians invaded at this time, or the Assyrians invaded, and then we get to that. But how it worked out perfectly seems a little bit like, I've never gone through it. It's funny to me that everyone accepts this. Well, so many people accept that that is what it says. But if true, because it's so on the nose, you know, it's like 4,000 years, Jesus born. And then prophetically, and that's why I kind of like, well, you know, he left in about, he was born in 4, and he had about 30 years old, and about a 3-year ministry. 33, 29, 33 minus 4 is 29. So he left around 29 AD or 30. That means we'd have 2000 in 2029 is actually the real year 2000, and also the year 6000, and also a day is as 1,000 years in the sight of the Lord, which makes it kind of an interesting time. It could be nothing, but it's certainly, you know, I'm always like, well, I better get ready, you know, just in case, because in any ways, even if the Lord doesn't come, you better get ready, because you're going to die, and you better be ready for that. And still got to get ready. No, you have to face judgment. You're going to stand before the Lord. And plus, what if the Lord doesn't come? Have you seen the state of the world lately? It's not good. There's a lot of danger in our current, you know, maybe not in our current place, but we're headed headlong into danger. And if the Lord doesn't come, you know, we could have a lot. We could have a pretty rough time of it. Let's just say that. Bad times could be coming if things are not, if we don't turn things around. And certainly in our country, but even all. Well, here's the thing: if things go bad in America, that's bad for the world, because it means an upheaval of the current world order, and that would bring about disaster for so many people. Everyone's always just anxious to break things down, and they don't consider like what's being upheld by that, what's built on that. So she flees into the wilderness, where she hath a place prepared of God, that they should feed her there 1,200. You know, the idea of, again, this makes me think of the prophet Elijah, who was fed in the wilderness by the widow woman, or was it a cave, whatever. He was hiding out with just a woman, and or no, was that Elisha? You know, it's been a while since I read Kings. But in any case, whether the exact prophet is not significant, the prophet Elijah or Elisha, they were in a cave and hiding. There was a woman who had just some meal and a measure of oil, and it was made to last. And then there was another time when the birds brought Elijah food. You know, the birds would bring it to him. That's why, and I look at that, and I remember that dream I talked about where I was sitting in my house and the water filled up in the bottle. And I say that You know, a lot of the things, if it's the end times, it's a question of the end times. The most important thing to prepare is yourself. You know, if you think civil war was coming, you should prepare for that. You know, and maybe that does mean have food and whatever. But if it's the end times you're worried about, you don't need any food or water to store for that time, because the Lord will prepare a place for us. He will prepare a place to shelter his bride from want and need, from a lot of the things like I said in the third trumpet, the wormwood poisons the water, and well, what are we going to drink? The Lord will provide, because the Lord's signs are not his wrath against you. They're not even his wrath against the world. They're just the signs that the end is coming. The wrath comes later. Well, actually, they may be intertwined. I should say that. Because the trumpets are signs, but they are also major disasters, right? So they can also be construed as God's wrath. But the fullness of the wrath is described in the vials, not the trumpets. The trumpets aren't meant to describe the wrath, though the events in the trumpets may connect to the events in the vials. And we will when we get to the vials in chapter 16, we will definitely explore those connections, because there's a lot of parity between the two. So she is sheltered for this 3-year period. You know, the tribulation is portrayed as a 7-year tribulation, but I never see it's 3 years. Everywhere I read and look, it's 3.5 years. So I don't understand. I guess they combine, because they think of Daniel's 70th week. But I was thinking in terms of the first half of the week already being done away with. Now, I could be wrong about that, but that's how I see it. I think in that way, the tribulation has been, you know, Jesus said, if the Lord had not shortened those days, no flesh should be saved. And so perhaps the idea that the time is cut down from 7 years, meaning he took the 3 and he applied them to the Christ ministry on earth in his incarnation in this first advent, and the other half he left as a half, as opposed to another 7 years of trouble. So she flees to be protected there of God. Now the warn. This is not chronological, because I think that reason she goes into the wilderness is because the dragon is on earth. There's all these ands. I just think it's just giving you different little dioramas, pictures of things that are, you know, the things that come to be for the end times. There was war in heaven. Michael and his angels fought against the dragon, and the dragon fought and his angels, and prevailed not, neither was their place found any more in heaven. And the great dragon was cast out, that old serpent, called the devil and Satan, which deceiveth the whole world. He was cast out into the earth, and his angels were cast out with him. So what was symbolized by the tail, and what was, you know, given in vision in that first statement, I see here given in detail. There was war in heaven. Prior to this, Satan is in heaven. In some sense, he deceives the world. He has some power in the world, but in general, he is not in the world in the way this describes him coming into the world. You know what I mean? Like, he's going to come in a much more personal way into the world. He is currently restrained. And that's hard for some people to believe. Like, well, look, it's running rampant. Things are worse than ever. Not really. Yeah, I will say that the peril, you know, people might notice, like, Paul, I thought you used to say that things have been really bad in the past, and it's not, you know, iniquity is not much worse now than it was in the past. I still stand by that as far as iniquity of human beings. There is great peril in our country politically and in the world politically, because we're having a backlash against the intentions of the globalists and people who want to globalize the planet, which is very dangerous. I mean, because once they do globalize it, it is either the Antichrist, or we're going to have our first taste of a type of Antichrist. Because whatever heads up that global government is going to be equivalent to Satan's reign. Meaning, just like the king of Babylon, just like the king of Assyria. This will be the global Satan, but it may not be the revelation Satan. But we don't want this. You know what I mean? And most people in the world don't want it. But there are elites who want to bring everything together under one roof so that they can dominate it, I guess. I don't know. And so it also will be a sort of a inverted, like the European Union is mostly headed by bureaucrats. You know, and that's the face of, I think, what a world government would be. It would be like a inverted hierarchy. I don't think they're going to have emperor of the world, but they will have a tyrannical body which rules over us. And that can all happen without Satan coming. But it would be very much Antichrist, at least in a typical sense. It's the type of Antichrist. It will behave like Antichrist. And we don't want that. And people don't, so there's potential of war ultimately between those groups. I'm trying to see here. Where are we? Oh, we are over an hour. Okay. So we're going to pick up with the dragon being cast out tomorrow. Sorry, I don't know. This is difficult for me to articulate on some level. Was just really getting into it. Tomorrow we will have, we'll start with, we'll be talking about the war, verse 7. So anyways, thanks for joining me in this study. Did I read it right? We are over, yeah, we are over an hour. Okay, so good, excellent. I look forward to studying with you, and etc. And here's the next one. What is the blood of the woman?